It was a hot June day in 1914, and the atmosphere was charged with an undercurrent of tension that had been brewing for decades. The gunshot that echoed through the heart of Europe in Sarajevo would change the course of history forever. This was not merely the calamity caused by a single bullet, but rather the culmination of centuries of accumulated anger, national identities, and imperial interests that had reached a breaking point. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand was the spark that ignited a powder keg, leading to one of the deadliest wars in history, where hundreds of thousands of soldiers would perish, cities would be reduced to rubble, empires would collapse, and the world order would shift in ways no one could fully comprehend. The depth of this war lay not only on the battlefields but also in the hearts of men, in the complex web of national identities, and in the unraveling of an age-old geopolitical system. As war drums began to beat across Europe, the response was overwhelmingly enthusiastic. In Paris, London, Berlin, and Vienna, young men rushed to don their uniforms and head to the front lines, spurred on by a fervent sense of patriotism and duty. "We'll be home by Christmas" became the rallying cry of this naive generation who believed that glory awaited them. No one could have predicted that this war, expected to last only a few months, would drag on for 4 harrowing years, leading to unparalleled devastation and sorrow. Had the people of that time glimpsed the faces of soldiers mud-streaked, trembling with hunger and fear in the trenches, they might have grasped the true and horrific face of war much sooner. The dramatic nature of World War I lay in how ordinary people became enmeshed in this immense and chaotic conflict. Young men filled with dreams of heroism set off for the front lines, imagining themselves serving their countries in noble battles. Hans, a young soldier from Germany, boarded a train to France, a foreign land he had never seen, with one singular thought: to return home a hero. Clad in the uniform lovingly sewn by his mother, he faced his uncertain future with courage, blissfully unaware of the horrors that lay ahead. Just weeks later, as he trudged through the blood-soaked trenches of Verdun, surrounded by the lifeless bodies of his comrades, Hans would confront the harsh reality that the heroism he had envisioned was nothing more than a mirage, a cruel trick played by the propaganda of war. The drama of the war extended beyond the soldiers on the front lines. Millions of civilians were drawn into the maelstrom, directly affected by its destructive force. In Beaumont, a small French village, life had been peaceful and quiet in the early months of the conflict. However, by 1916, during the massive German offensive along the Somme River, the idyllic village transformed into a living hell. The Battle of the Somme is etched in history as one of the bloodiest battles ever fought, with 60,000 British soldiers lost in a single day. Among those losses were not just soldiers, but entire families and villages consumed by the flames of war. The village of Beaumont was utterly obliterated, reduced to nothing but ruins and despair. French historian Jacques Benoit would later reflect in his memoirs about the village, poignantly stating, "Beaumont was not just a village. It was the death cry of a generation, of a civilization teetering on the brink of annihilation." One of the pivotal events of the war was the Ottoman Empire's entry into the conflict, which dramatically widened the scope of the war. Germany undertook significant efforts to secure the Ottomans as allies. With the Ottoman Empire's involvement, the battleground expanded into the Middle East. The Ottoman army would etch its name into history at the Dardanelles, where thousands of British and French troops met their match. Yet this victory came at an exorbitant cost to the Ottomans. A young Ottoman officer, Mustafa Kemal, famously commanded his soldiers at the Battle of Gallipoli, "I am not ordering you to attack. I am ordering you to die." These words encapsulated the bravery and unwavering resolve of the Ottoman soldiers, but also highlighted the immense toll that the war would exact. The thousands of soldiers who fell at Gallipoli left behind only gravestones, yet those stones would come to symbolize the rebirth of a nation struggling for its identity in the aftermath of war. On other fronts, similar harrowing dramas unfolded. On the Eastern Front, brutal clashes between Russia and Germany resulted in catastrophic losses for the Russian army, many succumbing not only to enemy fire but also to hunger and disease. Tsar Nicholas II's fateful decision to engage in the war ignited widespread discontent among the Russian populace. When the citizens of Petrograd took to the streets to demand change, the Tsar was swiftly overthrown, leaving Russia teetering on the brink of civil war. One of the most dramatic twists in this tale was the Bolsheviks' decision to withdraw from the war. In 1917, Lenin and his followers signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, effectively ending Russia's participation in the conflict. The treaty imposed harsh conditions on Russia, resulting in the loss of territories such as Poland, Ukraine, and the Baltic states. Yet for the Bolsheviks, consolidating power took precedence over everything else. Lenin famously declared, "The revolution can only survive with peace." The war marked the beginning of a new and tumultuous era in Russia. Yet the millions of lives lost would forever haunt the collective memory of its people. Another crucial turning point in the war emerged with the United States' entry into the conflict. President Woodrow Wilson framed the war effort as a noble endeavor, pledging to make the world safe for democracy as American soldiers embarked for the Western Front. A prevailing sense of hope swept through Europe, hinting that the end of the war might be on the horizon. However, Wilson's peace plan represented an idealistic vision, that often clashed with the harsh realities on the ground. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in Paris in 1919, imposed punitive reparations and territorial losses on Germany, while Wilson's ambitious 14-point plan was largely ignored by the victorious powers. The Treaty of Versailles not only economically crippled Germany, but also sowed the seeds for a future catastrophe, World War II. The treaty's harsh terms ignited deep-seated resentment within Germany, paving the way for the rise of authoritarian figures like Adolf Hitler, who would exploit this discontent to fuel his ascent to power. Yet the war was not solely fought by armies and nations. Millions of women, children, and elderly civilians were thrust into the harsh realities of conflict. In England, the wives, children, and families of soldiers sent to the front faced not only economic hardship but also profound social upheaval. Mary, a factory worker in London, received the heart-wrenching news that her husband had been killed on the Western Front, shattering her world in an instant. Left alone to care for 4 children, Mary understood all too well that the devastation of war extended far beyond the battlefields, penetrating every home and heart. This war destroyed a generation, she would later tell her grandchildren with tears in her eyes. There was a fire in every home, a fire that could never be extinguished, a fire doused in tears. Ultimately, World War I led to the collapse of 4 great empires: the Ottoman Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Germany, and Russia. Each was swept away from the stage of history, replaced by new states and regimes struggling to find their footing. However, this new world order did not usher in lasting peace. The map of Europe was redrawn, yet the anger and distrust between nations only deepened, setting the stage for future conflicts. This war, which claimed the lives of 20 million people and left millions more wounded, destroyed countless cities and towns, would be remembered as one of humanity's greatest tragedies. When World War I finally reached its grim conclusion, people emerged not only physically exhausted but also spiritually drained. Soldiers returning from the trenches found it nearly impossible to reconnect with the world they had once known. In the cafes of Paris, war veterans gathered to share their stories, recounting the horrors and the senselessness of the conflict they had endured. This conflict, once hailed as the Great War, would serve as a cautionary tale for humanity. But tragically, history would answer that question in the most brutal and painful ways imaginable. After 4 years of bloodshed, the world would never return to its old order, and the scars of war would remain etched in the collective memory of nations for generations to come.